Hey, thanks for stopping by waxing about Westworld. I'm overly analytical, and today I want to do something a little bit different. Today I'm just going to talk about theories. We only have two episodes, sadly, of Westworld left, so I wanted to hurry up and get this list out because I think it's kind of fun to constantly wonder what this show is going to do, how it's going to unfold, what means what, and any other kind of weird tinfoil hat conspiracy theories that I might have. I have them kind of broken down into either by character or just by generalization, and then at the end I'll have like a bunch of little brain taffy things that we can talk about later. So first, let's start with the multiple timeline theory that the Man in Black is actually William, and we're actually seeing two different timelines. When we see William, we actually see it in the past. When we see the Man in Black, then we're actually in the future. The other theory is that the park is actually a continuation of the movie. So where the original Westworld movie had left off, this is where this series actually picks up and goes from there. And I'll actually get more into that here in a little bit. But let's talk about Arnold. I don't think he ever really physically died. I think he's actually still very much alive in some form. So he has either been uploaded to a computer, or his consciousness has been moved into a host, or maybe he is still just physically alive. I mean, that's definitely a possibility too. That Arnold is actually the Man in Black, or that his brain was hijacked and he was turned into a host, which that would have to be just absolutely awful. Like he was an actual patron, and then he got hijacked and he was turned into a host. That he was actually a host that Ford had built a long time ago. So when we see the photo of them standing side by side, there's the real Ford, and then there is the host that is Arnold that Ford had created, like his first gen, and then kind of let this host, the sentient being, kind of like unravel on its own. And he either had to be put down because he got too crazy or too good. But either way, that Ford had to put him down. Arnold is the name of a computer program that helped create the hosts. So we don't actually have a physical person that is Arnold. We actually more have a series of like server farms or whatever, and Arnold is some sort of weird like analogy for that, if it would be. The last theory that I have about Arnold is the control program of the horse. Excuse me. Arnold is the control program of the hosts, and Ford is using that program to move events along. So Arnold is almost more of a plot device, speaking in the sense of Westworld as its own universe, not as in what we see as the show of being Westworld. So let's go ahead and move on to Wyatt, the ever elusive Wyatt that we've never seen. So let's go ahead and start throwing some spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. So how about Arnold is Wyatt? Or William is Wyatt? Or how about Wyatt is a scenario in the game and not a real person at all? That Wyatt is actually a series of events or whatnot that all come. It's a series of events that all kind of come together and is just labeled as Wyatt. Or how about that he is the host that actually is the key for the maze? So Wyatt is actually a host, not a real person, and he has some sort of special code or software in him that Arnold had left, that when they come to this, whatever the maze is, and that'll be coming later, that Wyatt will be the one to unlock it. Or he's essentially like the final boss battle that needs to happen before you can move on in the game. The last theory that I have for Wyatt is one of the original techs that actually helped start Westworld back in when Ford had said that it was basically them or him and a bunch of engineers for 3 years, and they were just free to create and do whatever in that 3 year time span. So maybe Wyatt was actually a physical person that was actually a part of that team. So it would have been Ford, Wyatt, and Arnold. And then when the dissolving of Ford and Arnold's relationship, that Wyatt had spun out on his own, and he's actually been living in the park this whole time. So let's get on to the Man in Black. So we'll actually have to bring up the fact that, yes, maybe he is Arnold. or that he is another programmed host that has actually been hijacked or hacked to be seen as human by the other hosts in the park, and he's actually just used as the token villain of the story, the evil force that has to move through the park to always give that sense of drama and balance. Kind of like when William said that he figured out how the park works, is that it always has to create a sense of urgency. Well, maybe the Man in Black is actually that urgency, just embodied as a host. The other theory that I have for the Man in Black is that he was a host based off of a real person, and it's almost a memorial to that person. So whether Ford created it or Arnold created it, or the board had requested that this host be made in this guy's honor, because we know there's a foundation and he's related to that foundation somehow. So maybe that's what the corporation did, as like a tip of the hat to him. And then he's essentially just free to do whatever he wants. That the last gift that they could give for him is to be truly free, set him free in the park, and just kind of go. Or the last theory that I have for that one is that he is actually from a rival corporation, and he's actually kind of sent there undercover to engage in like corporate espionage. So it was actually him that was actually smuggling the data out of the park. Speaking of which, I'm not 100% sold that we're actually smuggling data out of the park. There's a chance that somebody's actually smuggling data in, and that could actually be Arnold. I just kind of slid that one in there when I actually should have thrown it into a later time, but we'll get on with it. So let's go to Dolores, that she is the key to the maze, kind of like what I had mentioned before, that the maze is actually a thing, like either be a room or a series of code or an actual place. Either way, you need Dolores to get into it. That she has actually become truly self-aware and really sentient, or she's at least in the very she's in the stages of progress of trying to get to that point, but she's either so close or she's actually already there. Or to to flip that one, that she is only programmed to appear to be self-aware and sentient, and this is actually just all a part of the game, all part of the ruse that is WestWorld. Or that she's actually a replicant of Ford's wife or daughter. That the reason that Dolores has been so well taken care of over the years, and she's never been retired, and that she's always being what we think is upgraded. We definitely know she's always being repaired, but nobody's actually come out to say that she's actually been upgraded. And we know that she's the oldest host that's actually still walking in the park. So actually, maybe this was actually just a replicant of a relation of Ford's, or maybe even Arnold's, that is being hung around because they just can't seem to let go. Or she was actually used as like a countermeasure, that she was actually activated to help prevent the maze from being discovered altogether. So it may look like she's actually trying to help William get there or whatnot, but in actuality, she's actually there to try and circumvent it and cut it off and keep it from happening. So like at the 11th hour, she'll, prevent people from unlocking the maze or what have you. So from Dolores, let's go ahead and roll on into Ford. He's probably got the longest list here out of anybody. So we can actually assume that maybe he was actually a host that was actually created by Arnold, or that he is actually a guest at the park. And this whole thing that we're seeing is actually just a part of his fantasy. The other theory that I had for William, so I might as well just address it here, is that William is also the only other live person in this park, and he has the Western fantasy. So Ford has the future fantasy, and then William has his Wild West fantasy. Or how about Ford actually exists in Future World? And again, we're kind of tying the old school shows to the current work right now. So Future World is actually like a spin-off of Westworld. And I think there was a TV show even called like Beyond Westworld or something like that. And Future World is actually supposed to all kind of jive in with this whole thing. But maybe actually Ford is actually in that park. Like that park actually exists. And so does Westworld. That means that we would only be missing Roman world and medieval world. But I have a theory about medieval world that it's not true in any fucking way. I just thought it was fun to think about. But I will get to that at the very, very end. Sorry about that. My Amazon Echo went off for whatever reason. I have no idea why. By the way, love her to death. Anyway, moving on. So we left off with that Ford actually exists in future world. So how about we roll on to Ford and Arnold are actually the same person? That he went mad a long time ago and had a psychotic break, and he actually split his personality. May have actually been that Arnold was actually somebody else and had taken their own life or had died tragically or what have you, and Ford had just snapped and has actually created this Arnold half to him to help try and cope with all of that. Or how about Ford just went batshit crazy a long time ago and he started like this weird Rube Goldberg machine to isolate the park from the rest of the world and allow these hosts to become fully self aware and truly sentient and just kind of live on their own, protected, removed away from the rest of the world just to see what these hosts can do. And then essentially have Ford be the mayor or president or even God, because we know he's thrown that term around before, of the park. And I can't help but wonder if Ford actually didn't just up and kill Arnold. That since Arnold wanted to take the park in a different direction, and Ford was kind of more about the money, maybe Ford offed Arnold so that the park could actually be turned into like a money making machine. The other, I have a couple more theories. Another one is Ford is going to actually set up Bernard to take the fall for everything that Ford is going to do, and he will actually use the death of his son as the like catastrophic event that made him go absolutely mad and do all of this horrible shit. So Ford is gonna essentially get his revenge or what have you, and do some amazingly awful things or amazingly awesome things depending on your point of view. But either way, it's going to be Bernard that is actually going to be set up to take the fall for that, and so that Ford can actually walk away with his hands clean. Or how about Ford doesn't actually exist, that he's actually just a visual representation of the quote unquote voice in the bicameral mind that's in their heads. So everybody thinks that they're actually interacting with him, but in reality, they're actually just hearing the voice in their head so that they, to make sense of the situation, they essentially hallucinate or envision a physical body that is there. I haven't seen anybody touch Ford. There's never been a handshake or a pat on the back or anything, so it's quite possible that this is actually kind of true. The other one that I kind of like for Ford is that the host family in the house was actually Ford's actual family beforehand, and he may have even made himself into a host. So that the body that we see of Ford now is actually a host body, but it's actually his real mind that's actually inside of it. And the family that we saw in the little log cabin or whatnot that Ford was hanging on to because he, out of some nostalgic thing for Arnold, maybe that was actually his real family. The what we can presume to be the husband of the house, maybe that was actually Ford. And this body that we're seeing now is actually something quite different. So moving on to William, as we've already covered that, possibly William is actually the Man in Black, which kind of fun, and in a way, it kind of lines up. But I will talk a little bit more about that later as to why I think it could or could not happen. How about his brother-in-law? William's brother-in-law is actually a host, and William is real, and this is like their story. Because we never see the first time that we see either of them is when William wakes up on the train and I can't remember his name, is the brother-in-law is actually already awake. So since we've seen hosts go into these dreams before and their day essentially resets, maybe this is actually the story resetting, and in the beginning of episode 2, we actually got on the beginning of the loop for William and his brother-in-law. So let's go ahead and talk about Teresa quick. It killed me to see her go. But I have theories, and here we go. One, she's a host. She was never really a flesh and blood person. That she was actually created almost as a parody check for Ford and the park. And the point I want to point out is that the body that was actually being created in the basement could have been her replica. From what I saw real quick of the skeleton, it actually looked like a female pelvis that was in there. So maybe what Ford was doing was getting rid of that host or even maybe even the real person, right? Like he actually committed physical murder and is going to replace her with a host. Now that we've seen episode 8, we know that is more than likely not the case, but it was fun at the time. I guarantee it. Or how about she was actually part of an undercover law enforcement agency that was actually sent there to try and get into Westworld and actually uncover what the fuck it is that they're actually doing, with bioexperimentation and slavery and all this other stuff. So, and to go along with that, she also could have been a plant from another corporation. She could have been actually trying to her way in because she clearly has a disdain for Westworld. She obviously doesn't want to be there. So why is she there? Well, maybe she's being forced to be there by a different corporation to try and get her mitts on everything. And maybe she really was the person that was actually leaking all of that data out of the park. Who knows? How about that she knows that Arnold has been in communication with him? So she is totally privy to the fact that Arnold and Ford have actually been talking back and forth, and she needed to be eliminated to sever that link. The one that is actually kind of alluded to is that if the theory of this is the Westworld TV series actually a continuation from the movie, that it's very possible that she was actually in the park when it went to shit in the movie. Because she does say that when she was a kid, when we saw her, and I believe it was in episode 3, with Ford at the plantation, essentially when he holds her hostage, she actually says, she starts pointing out where she had actually sat before, and Ford already knew all about it. But if she's a replicant, then Ford would also have that information as well. So it's just kind of fun to think about, I think. And here's the other one that's kind of a gut puncher, is that she really was the wife of Bernard and the mother of his boy. So that essentially Bernard and her were real people. Bernard had died or committed suicide over the grief of losing his son, or had something to do with of killing his son, couldn't take it. He had died, and Ford had essentially built hosts in their place, and that Teresa was still flesh and blood, and her staying there and being with Bernard was essentially the closest that she could have to try and get that life back. Now let's go ahead and let's talk about Dear Sweet Maeve. What is going on with her? I have a theory that she may be the quote-unquote gunslinger that brings chaos to the park, or mass liberation, depending how you want to look at it. That she is essentially going to slide into the role that Yul Brynner played, the gunslinger in the movie. Maybe she is essentially this park's apocalypse, or she is going to be the great liberator of these hosts and finally allow them to break free of their loops and actually go ahead and move on to live and appreciate life as they know it. And that brings me into the whole, like, she's going to be the essentially the Jesus of the park and bring light and liberty to all the hosts and whatnot. Or how about that at one point in time she was once a real actor in the park, and when the man in black killed her the first time when she's in the cabin with her little girl, that was actually her for real. Like at one point in time the park had hosts, and they actually had like live actors to help with that immersion, because we know that the Revision 1 hosts weren't all that great. We learned from Ford that a simple handshake would give them away, that they repeated themselves a lot, that they broke down all the time. And we can see from Old Bill, their movements were kind of herky-jerky, but we also don't know if that's because he had been in storage for so long and he just kind of stiffened up. I mean, the rabbit hole goes on for miles. Either way, the point of the whole thing is that that she was actually a real-life person, and when the man in black had killed her, they went ahead and turned her into a host as a way of either saving her life or memorializing what had happened. And maybe the man in black is actually also destined to constantly repeat that day, that they're on this loop together, or they have two loops, and either way, the man in black is forced to repeat those loops and essentially pay for what it is that he had done to poor sweet Maeve. So let's get on to the biggest character in Westworld, which is Westworld as a whole. And I've already brought up the one theory that I believe that this is actually possibly a continuation from the movie, which that would just be awesome if it was. It generates its own list of questions, but at the same time, I think it actually answers a ton of questions. And then I also brought up the fact that possibly Westworld had already been divided into two parks: the Westworld and the Future World, and the one where Ford is actually in the Future World and everybody else is in the Westworld. So that the Future World is actually what we see as the Delos headquarters proper. That's actually like the park of Future World itself. And to go along with that, I think that the Westworld of this series was built on top of the old Westworld as a way of kind of burying the secret. And the only real proof I have for that is when they go down into cold storage in episode 1. We can actually see it. They look like what's in like an abandoned mall, and there's actually the globe that says Delos on it. And obviously things have been built on top of that. So that's really kind of the only thing that I have to go for off of that. Or how about that it was actually based off of a real town and real events, and we switch back and forth from the real version to the virtual one. So as the camera is cutting around, and what we might perceive as being different timelines is quite possibly true, but the difference is that one of those is actually all fake, and it's actually based off of what had actually really happened. And the loop that we're seeing, if you're to divide the entire Westworld experience, and if you cut it in half, the loop that we're seeing, for the most part, is actually just it constantly repeating itself over and over and over. And people can come in and check it out and kind of interact with it. And I kind of lost my train of thought. Anyway, moving on. So, how about everyone that works in Westworld, like in the Delos headquarters, is actually a host except for Ford and Arnold. So that everybody is a synth, or is a host that works in that building or works for the park proper. So that means like Felix and Sylvester, and don't think that I didn't catch the hilarity of those names. As soon as Maeve said Sylvester, I kind of cracked up a little bit. So like those two are hosts. Obviously that Teresa and Bernard would be hosts. Elsie is a host. Everybody is a host except for Ford and Arnold. And it's almost kind of like a pissing contest maybe between the two, that they're kind of locked in some sort of struggle, and Arnold is trying to get control of hosts to help defeat Ford, and Ford is trying to get control of hosts to defeat Arnold, or even make their own version of hosts to boost their numbers or send in against the other. How about that the hosts actually have human brains, and they've just actually been altered with the technology to essentially turn them into hosts, so that their minds can be wiped and a series of programs can be loaded in. But what makes it horrifying is that if that was actually a real human brain, that was actually a real human, a real person at one point in time that they put into this body, that means that they had a life, that they had people that they loved and that cared about them. But more importantly is that they actually do feel the pain and the terror and everything else that are subjected, that they are subjected to. So those are actually real emotions. It would be just like having a real person reacting, and that's how they got that level of realism. And I think that's why they really try to keep that park so secret and so locked down. Or the giant cheat of it all is that this is all a massive VR world, and the hosts are actually other players, and Ford is essentially like the dungeon master of it all. So May, every time that she loops or dies or comes back in, that's somebody else having a chance at the wheel, or maybe the same player, and it's just a continuation, or like essentially like another life, and they can try it again. I think that's actually the largest cop-out of all time. It's kind of like using time travel in comic books to fix shit. So let's go ahead and talk about the maze quick. It's quite possibly that it's computer code to actually unlock the host's true potential. So in episode 8, when we saw that they had brought Maeve in and she was just an absolute wreck, and we looked at Bernard's tablet, we actually saw a medallion on there that looked like it had maze components to it, and it said that she was heavily fragmented. So what if this computer code actually goes into essentially that socket, and it actually unlocks all the hosts and their true potential and their awakening and their self-aware and all that. Or it could actually just be used as a metaphor for a path that one of these hosts has to travel to actually become sentient. So when in episode 1, when Ford was talking about the pyramid and how Arnold was working on that, maybe that's been fixed, it's been cracked. But he's created these elaborate situations in the park that actually bring those changes about or out of the host to actually make them essentially sentient and become self-aware. We always see that there's triggering events, right? So maybe that's what had happened, is that Arnold, maybe even Ford had done it as well, I don't know, had set this world in action that will test these hosts. And if they keep passing these tests, then eventually with every test that they pass, they unlock a new part about themselves until eventually at the very end, in the center of the maze, essentially, they are awakened 100%. And that's kind of why we see that little man or woman or whatever figurine in the middle of the maze. Maybe that's what that's set to represent. And to kind of go along with all that, the maze symbol itself is actually like a password to actually unlock data, which is kind of what I brought up earlier, but just kind of in a different manner. How about that the maze is actually a special room or town or even a house where Arnold actually is, in whatever form that he may take, whether Arnold actually is just figured out a way how to put his consciousness into a computer or into a host, or maybe he's actually still in his physical form. Either way, that this is where Arnold actually is, and Arnold actually holds the last secret to unlock the hosts altogether, or to actually give the park over, kind of like a Willy Wonka thing, to give the park over to essentially a successor that actually successfully made it through all of this. Yeah, it's a possibility. Or the theory that I was playing with a long time ago is that the symbol of the maze is actually like a specific beacon that only the hosts can see. If you have human eyes, you can't see it. It's data that's hidden that you would actually need to have these, to be a host to actually unencrypt and actually see. So everywhere that there is this symbol, they know they're actually getting closer. So it's kind of like a MacGuffin. It helps bring them to the center of the maze, so to speak, or bring them to Arnold, but only hosts can see it. How about that it's actually just a maze? Like, it's a real maze, and it's actually a map of all of WestWorld. So if you were to take WestWorld, the park as a whole, because we know that it's circular, or it appears to be circular because of the host or the table, the holographic table that's in the middle of the QA room, so that it's circular. So maybe the maze symbol that we see is literally a map of the park. And the man in black has actually found out where the starting point of the map is, and he's actually now currently walking the maze as we speak, to try and get to the end. So that's why it was so important for him to actually have a copy of that map with him when he scalped Kissy. he attached it to his saddle. He was actually using it as a real roadmap. And the last thing that I have for the maze is that it's actually just a prize to be obtained. It's not the pathway to something, rather it is the reward for something, which makes it kind of convoluted, and it kind of falls apart under its own weight. But that's kind of what I've tossed around so far. Now I'm just going to go to a section where I just kind of want to talk about things to point out or to think about. So these are the questions that I've had that I haven't been able to answer, or they become so meta that they kind of fall apart, or some things just maybe aren't even true, but they're just kind of fun to think about, like brain taffy. I want to point out that we've only seen 4 people consume food. And technically, because it's William Lee Lucas and the lady who's the board member, we've only seen those 4 consume food, but technically I don't think we actually get to watch William eat. I think he just had the plate of food in front of him. So if William is a synth, there we go. We also never see Dolores Abernathy's mother. We see the body, we see hair, but we never hear the voice, and we never see the mother as being animated in any way. The only thing that we've ever seen of her is just a dead body essentially laying on the floor in episode 1. But when Peter Abernathy is breaking down and he is really struggling, Dolores calls for her, but there's never a reply back. There's never a woman who rushes out to see what's going on. Anytime that somebody calls for Mother, we never see her. So I just found that really kind of weird. The other question well, not the other, but one of the other questions I had was that how does a host blood transfusion really work? How the Man in Black managed to drain poor Lawrence, and then somehow give that to Teddy. That was weird. Did he make Teddy drink it, and somehow in the host's anatomy, that was a way of actually putting fluid in? Or is there a port that we don't get to see, like a hidden panel that he has found after years of slaughtering these things, that he's come to learn their physiology and anatomy so well that he knows where all these little compartments are? Or does he know the anatomy so well that he can do an infield blood slash fluid transfusion? Either way, it's horrifying. And also that if there is any real proof to actually show that there are two timelines going on where the Man in Black and William are the same person, that is with poor Lawrence. Because we actually see Lawrence with William as like a warlord, the war profiteer. With the Man in Black, he is already being sentenced to crimes, and it was actually going to be hung for those crimes. And that's when the Man in Black steps in, and then that's when we hear that they have this huge history together. So if that is what's going on, Lawrence is the proof of that. To counter, I will say this, that if there isn't two timelines going on, the proof in that statement would be when he is talking to Teddy, and he actually tells Teddy, he's like, once you used to be beautiful. And then he talks about how the first time he was at the park, he cut one of them open, and it was just a bunch of little machines and little parts and stuff that were all working together, and he thought that was beautiful. So the intricacies of the actual design of the first gen, he loved that elegance to it. But when they switched over to this more human aspect of it, that is when he kind of tuned out and was no longer fascinated with these things. And maybe that's when he really started to kill them and kind of go apeshit. So if there is proof of no two timelines, it's because of that. Because we never saw William open one of them up and dig through it. And we know that the Gen 1s were stuck out like a sore thumb. And they were very easy to pick up on. Again, they always repeated. They broke down, and apparently just simple gestures would always give them away. And that's when Ford says, a mere handshake would give them away. So that's kind of the point and counterpoint of that whole thing. So another thing that caught me off guard is like, what's up with that doll that looks like what I call the butchers? The people that are in the white and the red and the hoods with the lights on the side that make him look like a bad Jim Henson character. What's up with that? Why is that a thing? Or was that something that Maeve just envisioned to try and help cope? Like it was a coping memory that wasn't really there. It was another part of her unlocking, so to speak. And then also another thing is that we never really know how long a loop is. Is there any real way for us to tell? Is it really just a 24-hour period? Or is it whenever they go to sleep? Or is it whenever they die? Or are loops all situational? So if somebody is on a loop and like let's take Lawrence, for instance. Let's say he was on a huge, massive loop, but what ended up happening is that the Man in Black hijacked him, from being hung. So that loop was paused, and then after he killed Lawrence, then the loop was able to pick up again after the butchers came and got him repaired and whatnot, and sent him back out into the field. So I guess that's something else that we can kind of wonder about as well. And also, why is Teresa allowed to smoke inside? Like, how does she get away with that? Now, if everybody was a host, then I can see that, because then there's obviously no risk of injuring anybody else with smoke. Or if there was a fire, not really that big of a deal, right? No human lives would be spent. And this is just actually something I want to point out. There's just a ton of Shakespeare references in this show. It's kind of cliche. And it's getting also a bit old in the actual show itself. And honestly, that's my only complaint of the show, period. is the constant Shakespearean references, because we've heard it in other movies before, as these codes, and it's this weird like superiority complex thing that I think some writers have, that if you ever read a book once in a while, you totally know what I'm talking about, that kind of thing, or an appreciation for the classics. It's just kind of a douchey move, and I'm just getting kind of tired of it. So also, I think I've noticed that the player piano may actually be like the cause of some events to happen, like an audio trigger. So to set things off in motion, like say at the Maricopa, all somebody has to do is just send a song to the player piano. The player piano will start to play, and then the host then respond to that song. And each song is a different situation. There's another question that we haven't really gotten the answer to, and I know they'll actually tell us about it, which is who was really using the transmitters from the bicameral mind days. Was it Ford or Teresa? Is it Arnold? Or was it Bernard? Has Bernard gone like rogue? I mean, who was using these, and then for why? I think it may be Arnold that was actually using them to try and actually reprogram the host to make them sentient and alive. And I'm kind of leaning towards that. I don't think Teresa was doing it to fuck the park over, but as easy as it is for that all to line up right now with the facts that we're getting in the events, it still seems just almost like low-hanging fruit. And if it's one thing that this show has taught us, is that anytime you think there's low-hanging fruit, it's poison. It's not a real thing at all. And then after episode 8, did Bernard actually kill Elsie? Or did she manage to somehow get free, or was that a false memory? I really don't want Elsie to go anywhere. I love her. She's a little spitfire. I love her blunt honesty. She makes me laugh, and she makes me think, and I love her as a character. As we've seen with all of really the female characters in this show, is they're all very strong characters. They're all very independent and sure of themselves, and they're not a victim in any way, And I really don't want Elsie to be a victim, right? I really want her to somehow live on, and maybe even be like the foil of the day, that somehow, people counted her out because she thought she was dead, like in a bad cliche from an action movie, and she comes back and she has her hasta la vista moment. I don't know, but poor Elsie. And then there always seems to be like a linking event that triggers the memories, and that's when the hosts kind of start to act up. So in this last episode, with episode 8, we saw Teddy finally had his trigger, and then he actually started to remember that the Man in Black had dragged Dolores away, and then that brought up all these memories, and I think he's now starting to unfold as well. Dolores was the first, and I think she actually passed it on to Maeve when she said these violent delights have violent ends. I think that was a triggering event for Maeve, and that's what kind of started her on her own process of being self-aware. So I think it can be passed on, not like a virus as in like it's code, but I mean it's just a linking event that will take what the reveries have essentially kind of already linked, but actually like solidifies that into an actual cohesive thought that the hosts can now actually interpret and understand. Or I could go in a completely bizarre direction and say that the fly that's always on people's faces that bugs the shit out of me was actually a drone, and that fly was actually delivering a payload, a computer virus. Because we've seen that fly. Oh, it always makes me want to shoo it off, and it makes me want to scratch my eyes when I see it like run across Dolores's eyes. It's very unsettling. It's gross. And then if Bernard is a host, why have him go through the trouble of having that like Skype conversation with his wife? Does that mean that his wife is also a host? Does that mean that it was just an elaborate program that Bernard interacted with as part of his loop? That there was essentially a pre-recorded video that he just goes to and does the same things over and over and over? Well, what is up with the Skype phone call? I don't understand that at all. And then to kind of go alongside of that is that maybe that phone call was actually a dream, and that was actually his way of somebody trying to get in to manipulate Bernard. Maybe that's what we see when Ford is tinkering around, is that there's some sort of visual representation that the hosts actually go through, and that's how they get their new programming. I don't And it always seems to be like sleep is almost a catalyst for the host's awakening. So, like, one of the instances that I can point out at the top of my head is when Maeve scribbles down what one of the butchers looks like and then goes to put it in the floorboard. And then she sees that, she's done it at least 6 times, that she's looped 6 times and drawn that out. So is it every time that they go to bed, like it gets a little worse? Like when we dream, and it's supposed that that's how we make sense of our day and sort and store information. Well, maybe that's what's going on here. And every time that they quote unquote go to sleep, that their brains are actually organizing this data that they have in their head, that these reveries have unlocked, and is actually starting to piece it all together. So I always just found the sleep aspect to be kind of weird, and that the only time that we actually see somebody who we believe is not a host sleep is William, and that is when he is on the train, the going to Westworld for what we presume to be the first time. Also, just as a side note, what the hell's in the safe at the saloon? I don't want it to be. I don't want it to be empty. I so want there to be something inside of it, like the location to Arnold, or the actual answer of the maze, or I want there to be something cool in that safe so bad, because I want Hector to be rewarded in some way for his debauchery. I love it. I also want to know, how long does a host's battery last for? Because Dolores has been out in the woods for a long time, but although we do see her get pulled in, well, let's not confuse it with timelines, but let's just say that if there's only one timeline, the one that we're watching, Dolores gets pulled in. So maybe they're getting her charged and a little repairs here and there and tweaking her and then sending her back out before William knows that she's gone. But if it is multiple timelines, then those little pit stops can happen at any point in time, and we kind of just had no idea. Or maybe the hosts, like in Futurama, drink alcohol to recharge their batteries. The only person that we haven't seen drink hard alcohol is Dolores, but pretty much almost everybody else has taken a shot of alcohol at some point in time throughout this show. So to go along with that, I haven't seen anybody drink water, just straight up water. Maybe they have and I missed it. It's there's been the famous milk incident in booze, but we never just see water. We see the attempt by the downed soldier that was supposed to ambush William and Dolores, but after the water is given to him, he dies. Well, coincidentally, in the Westworld movie, there's a scene that's very similar to that. Only in the movie there was way more sparking and smoke that happened because he tried giving her water. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Episode 8 was huge. I'm still kind of crushed over what happened in 7 with Teresa being killed. Just, it destroyed me. Clementine, the death of Clementine, that was awful. Although I don't think she's been completely decommissioned. I think that Clementine is going to come back. And then the other thing that I kind of wanted to point out is that in episode 1, when Bernard is taking Peter and Walter down into the sub-basement for cold storage, that Bernard actually whispers something to Peter, and then like a second later, you can actually see in his right eye, be on our left-hand side, there's a tear welling up in his eye. So I'm wondering if Bernard didn't give a voice command to Peter, that Peter is still somehow gonna come into play, that Bernard, that this is a part of that Rube Goldberg machine that Ford had set off to bring Peter back into the fold, and it may have something to do with trying to control Dolores or stop her in some way. Or the other thing that I could think of with that scene is that what if cold storage, let's just for a second assume that the hosts never truly go offline, even after they're quote unquote lobotomized. What if they are still very much quote unquote alive and they're just trapped inside of a body that can no longer move? So that would be like a sentence worse than death. I mean, that would just be an awful hell, because we have no idea. We can roughly assume that maybe some of them have been down there for at least 30 years, maybe even longer. Depends on which theory you want to pick up with. If if it's the Westworld continuation or if this is something brand new, we know that there's at least 30 years of park history here. So some of those people may have been in there. Like, I don't know, it's like, say Ford got pissed off at Arnold and put him in a host body, or if Arnold was created by Ford the other way, but Arnold is actually in the sub basement and he has just been tortured for this entire time. And maybe that's why Peter is actually crying, is because he actually knows that he's going to have to go through this hell. And it's awful. And the only reason that brings me to that point is because Bernard had to say something to Peter, but he didn't have to say anything to Walter. Walter went ahead and moved and found his place amongst the herd, with no with no provocation at all. But there was definitely an interaction with Peter, and I tried slowing that film down. I don't know how many times to see if I could make out what was being said, and I turned on the subtitles, and of course it just says whispering. Shit. But I really want to know what that whole conversation was about. So anyway, we only have 2 episodes left. I'm hoping for huge things. Oh, the last thing that I wanted to bring up is that in episode 7 with Hector and Bernard, Bernard is going through like the self-check diagnostics, like, do you remember this, and blah, blah, blah. But then he shows him those pictures and he's like, does this ring a bell? And he sees, like that weird stock photo that we've all seen of like the dude in the lab, it's all Tyvek'd up. But then he flips the page and then we see a bullet train. But the thing that I find interesting about that is that the color scheme on the bullet train is the exact same color scheme that we see used in the movie Future World. It's that same like cream, orange, and red. And we also see those colors replicated with the butcher's uniforms. They'll have the white outside, and they have that like weird cream latex apron thing, which I don't know why you would need a latex apron if your suit's already made out of rubber, but whatever. And then also the red with that as well. So we see those colors kind of repeat. So if we look at the lady in the photograph, which don't even get me started with that whole thing. I'm going to actually talk about that in my season 1, episode 1 breakdown about the photo conundrum. But we also see those colors replicated there as well. So maybe that's also kind of telling us something to kind of bring all of these together into one thing. So maybe season 2 is going to be, it takes place in a different park. Maybe the park that the quote unquote storyline that Ford is working on right now is actually medieval world or Roman world or future world. But he's actually building on a brand new park. So season 2 will actually put us in a different park. We'll still have the same Delos drama to deal with. They can't tie up everything in 2 episodes. But I do feel that the next continuation on will have to be in a new park. Now, whether that is with Ford or without him, I'm going to have to say we're done with Ford. I don't see him carrying on to another season, mainly because I don't see Anthony Hopkins signing up for another one. He's kind of a one-hitter quitter kind of thing. If he does, awesome. Because I will say it again, and I've said it many, many times, is that the actors in this show, even the supporting actors, the minor actors, they're all at the top of their game. I don't know how the director pulled it out of them, but they are just crushing it. And it's been so wonderful to see. Like, when you look at Peter Abernathy, his acting was absolutely amazing. Or like Old Bill. That one still gets me. And also, he's the same actor that was top dollar in The Crow. And after I found that out and I put the voice, I was like, oh shit, that totally is the same guy. But anyway, the lip movements and everything, I mean, they're fantastic. Everybody is just crushing it. I had given up on TV until I came across WestWorld, and it has actually saved my hope for the future of entertainment, because this is just firing on all cylinders. And there's only 2 other things that I want to bring up before I get out of here. And that is one, I'm afraid that Westworld may crumble under its own weight as a show. Because we're getting this build up, right? Like there's all these different storylines that are kind of starting to come to a boiling point. But what if the end result cannot deliver on the hype, essentially, and we end up being really let down? I never watched any of the show Lost. But from what I understood from all of the nerd ranting that went on, is that it was kind of the same thing, where there was this huge buildup, and then the ending was just a giant double middle finger, and everybody was pissed. So I really hope that's not going on here. Now, for the fun thing that I promised you in the very beginning, that's actually just kind of fun to think about, is what if medieval world is actually Game of Thrones? Like, how awesome would that be? Is that is a whole separate park that has actually been going on, and season two is actually going to be, Delos behind the scenes of trying to keep this medieval park up and going, and whatnot. I don't know. It's total bullshit, but I just thought it'd be kind of funny to bring up. Kind of one of those like fun mind blow moments, right? So, anyway, that was me rattling on about Westworld for a while. I hope that these theories have sparked some in you. I would really like to hear if you have any theories, if there's things that I've missed. Please definitely go ahead and comment below, and let's go ahead and hash it out, because this has been one of the only shows that I can think of where I enjoy sitting down and talking with other people about it, because everybody kind of has their own spin on it. The writing is so well done that everybody can kind of take what they want from it and leave the rest. And I really enjoy hearing what people have to say about it. So with that, at my 50-minute marker, I will finally let you go. Thanks a lot, people, and have a great night. Bye.